I just want to point out that New Line Cinema released this movie 1 year before Fellowship of the Ring.
Wild times for New Line.
Granted, Fellowship had like double the budget, but this movie is definitely not nearly half as good.
Not half the... No.
So my name is George, and with me is Chris, and today we are looking at the year 2000's Dungeons and Dragons.
So this movie is like a classic bait and switch. I don't really remember this movie coming out. I'm sure the trailer looked pretty exciting with some like theatrical shots and some dungeons and some dragons. They give you a dragon in a dungeon in the first 5 minutes. But after that point, they just deliver the most generic, underproduced genre story that you could possibly imagine, leading up to a god-awful third act.
It's a very busy movie, visually, but nothing happens.
You're right about busyness. It's a good comparison to Van Helsing, because there's a lot going on, but it doesn't generate value for the viewer.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Get out of here.
So I read the story of how this movie came to be in it, and it's a little bit sad. Basically, this guy, Courtney Solomon, was like this huge D&D fan. He's Canadian. That's why I find this sad. That's my identification. Anyway, he loved D&D. He thought there should be a D&D movie. No one could get it going. He talked to who is it? Not Wizards of the Coast at this point, but anyway, whatever the other company is that own D&D. And they were like, no one's been able to like nail the X factor of what makes D&D great. And apparently he was the one that did in his pitch. Did not make it through the movie, as I think we're going to use the word generic over and over in this episode. They went through a series of big directors. Like at one point, James Cameron was interested in the movie. There are articles with Stan Winston attached to direct. At one point, it was $100 million movie, and then at another point, it was like a $3.5 million movie. It finally turned out to be a $35 million movie, and according to Courtney Solomon, this young guy, he was just pushed into... They were like, well, you've been on the project for a long time, you just direct it too. But so all of a sudden, he's directing this under-budgeted, massive Dungeons and Dragons movie. It's a person who was in way over their heads.
That explains a lot. Yeah. Oh, you're telling me there's a different timeline where this movie was directed by James Cameron, worked on by Stan Winston with $100 million budget?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about one good thing here in this movie.
Yeah,
I reckon the only good thing is Jeremy Irons in this movie. I've been watching Rings of Power, and there was one problem, like one thing that I had a gripe up with that show. Okay, so it's high fantasy, just like Dungeons and Dragons. They're both kind of high fantasy worlds.
Yeah. And
with Rings of Power, the biggest problem that I've found with that show, and the same thing with Wheel of Time, is that they have actors who doesn't have the presence and the gravitas to deliver those like high fantasy dialogue. Right? Because they're not Ian McKellen, they're not Shakespearean actors who can project their personality even through like, casting spell dialogues.
Right.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
Jeremy Iron here is someone who can do it. His personality is so big that even with the ridiculous dialogue that he's given, it still is so entertaining.
Oh, yeah, it's so incredible. And I mean, we're introduced to him here, and the first shot is literally just like him walking towards the camera and arriving and his face. And it's just like so exciting. Before he's even spoken, you can just see that this performance is going to be huge.
I just want to point out, looking at this dragon, I want to say that Reign of Fire is only a year and a half later.
Yeah.
With nearly the same budget, but the dragons in that movie is miles better.
Yeah, this kind of looks like it looks like a Nintendo 64 Yoshi in a remaster.
It looks like an early 2000 Blizzard cutscene.
Yeah. It is a fantastical image of a dragon, I guess. It's not like so bad that you can't even watch the movie, but it's close. It is a little bit... The opening I found... Again, I was very interested where the movie was going, basically until this moment when we introduced the hip young fantasy leads. So we got like adventure version Wesley Crusher, basically. And he's the hero. And then we have Marlon Wayans in another 2000s era performance. We'll say that.
Yeah. Even in a high fantasy movie based on a tabletop game, Marlon Wayne can't escape playing that black comedic relief fool.
Still a classic, like, hip urban youth written by a clueless middle-aged guy somewhere.
Who does nothing but scream in high pitch and just be significantly dumber than his white counterpart. I mean, he's one step away from just shouting "damn" and "oh no" and "hell no."
It's pretty close. It's pretty close. It reminded me of nothing so much as that Family Guy joke where there's a buddy cop comedy and it's like Chris Tucker and Jesus, and they I think kind of like inadvertently in that parody they kind of like hit upon something that's so annoying about where this genre has gone, which is like, you know, Jesus pulls out a gun or something and he's like, "You ever use one of these?" And then Chris Tucker pulls out a joint and he's like, "You ever use one of these?" Which is great parody because that's like in 48 hours they had this incredible like black character, white character, and like the interplay between them, and you saw like how effective they both were in their own ways and in their own worlds, and where they could get ahead and where they couldn't. And by the 2000s, that had really like shifted into this bullshit where there's like a competent white guy and then there's a black guy that's along for the ride that you're like, this person is literally just like holding you back and making the quest worse.
Marlon Wayne's character serves no purpose in the story, really. He's just there to be annoying.
And then
he's there to shout bad slogans.
He's not even good at being a thief. Like every time they do sneaky thief stuff, he's like tripping over himself and like hitting his head on doors and like.
It's like anytime there's problems in the story, anytime the hero is supposed to run into trouble and challenges, it's not because the bad guys did something. It's because they made the idiot make a mistake.
Right. There's an icky feeling when a character doesn't serve a purpose in the story beyond the purpose they have for your entertainment. And we have the main thief character who like gets a lot of shit done and has motivations and goals and wants to do all that stuff. But then this sidekick character is just there for us to laugh at, as you've said. And that starts to feel unpleasant after a little while. Like you wouldn't want to have that relationship to someone in real life. Like, oh, that's my friend that I just keep around because I find it funny to laugh at their antics.
He has no redeeming moments.
No.
There is no moment where he's like, okay, he's mostly an idiot, but he sometimes gets these like flashes of brilliance, you know, like or moments of heart. Like Homer Simpson, Peter Griffin, they're complete morons, but they're good characters. They're great characters because they are interjected with moments of heart, with moments of sudden brilliance, or with moments where their comedy, even though it comes through from their idiocy, it's not an annoyance. It's not a hindrance.
Even Jar Jar Binks managed to inadvertently, through his tomfoolery, turn the tide of that battle.
Oh, and that reminds me, if you like this video and you want to hear the entire uncut 90-minute long podcast version, go check out our Patreon. Links down below in the description. Anyways.
We discover in this scene that what we're going to be watching is a discount Harry Potter trio. Our generally terrible lead are Hermione, except none of the good parts about Hermione. She's just kind of annoying and distracted and complaining all the time. Ron Weasley, except way worse.
And not funny. And Harry Potter, except forgettable. Yeah, you're right. And that also came out, what, like a year after?
No idea. But just so you have if you haven't seen this movie recently for some strange reason, you should be watching it every year, obviously. The level of banter we're talking about here is as they've got the holding spell on them, the hero's like, this is probably the only way she can get guys to go home with her.
So lastly, we're introduced to the fourth character in the party, the Dwarf Barbarian, who basically has no dialogue.
And when he does, it's you wish he didn't. Played by the great Lee Ehrenberg, who, if you don't recognize from this, you are certain to recognize from Pirates of the Caribbean as one of the two jokey sidekick pirates.
Oh, that's right.
But you'll see him in lots of movies if you start looking for him.
Oh, he's much better in that movie.
He is. He's a great guy. He's a very entertaining presence.
Yeah.
But when he's just kind of hunching over, pretending to be a dwarf, despite, as we can see right now, being taller than the rest of the cast,
Yeah.
it's not great.
It's gonna be these four for quite a while in the movie. Like it's a terrible party of personalities. Our lead actor is boring. His sidekick is annoying. The mage has one emotion, and the dwarf doesn't speak.
And also like one spell.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And the quest does hit all the, like, they, as we're seeing, they stop at a tavern, they do the various like things that ordinarily happen in a quest, but they get captured. He goes through traps, he rips off Raiders of the Lost Ark, etc., etc. Like, all this quest stuff does happen, but I like you were saying, I just wasn't on board at the start even. Like, we had fallen off the cliff before the quest even started.
It took me a while to find the right words to describe one of the biggest flaws in this movie, in addition to Marlon Wayans' character. And it wasn't until, like, I don't know, I want to say like 40 minutes in before it clicked in. Everything that occurs in this movie is incredibly unsatisfying. And I think it's because that there's no sense of weight to anything that's happened. Events just kind of really, they unfold really quickly. They escape from a tower, immediately gets found, immediately gets captured, spends 20 seconds at a tavern, and then is immediately found again, and then immediately escapes again. But the problem is that there's no like logical reason for how each and one of those steps occur, and they don't showcase the character's sort of individuality or uniqueness or like their abilities as a class archetype to affect the outcome of every single one of those steps. Literally, the bad guy just like walks into this tavern, looks around for a few seconds, and then just finds the protagonists. And then the whole tavern just goes into like a brawl and blocks the bad guys from chasing. It feels like if this was an actual session of D&D, like an actual campaign, it would just be a session where the players make no choices and do nothing but listen to a DM describe the situation from location to location for 2 hours.
I'll have to paraphrase it. I don't exactly remember it, but there was this brutal line from a critic that I saw on Wikipedia that was like, it has the pacing of several mashed together Pokemon episodes. You may be capturing the soul of the movie there. You're right that the X factor of Dungeons and Dragons, as I understand it, obviously is the sense of possibility and the sense of being able to embody someone in a different world and think about the choices that they might make in a given situation. And you're right when it feels like such an incredibly well on the rails script and experience with this movie. There's no room to get that feeling that is the main feeling of D&D.
You too big. Get it?
Again, you see what I'm talking about here? So they're looking for the Thieves Guild, and they walk into a city. Within 5 seconds, they immediately spot a purple guy. That they immediately know is part of the Thieves Guild. And through none of their abilities as a character, they just get brought to the Thieves Guild.
No, this would have been a really obvious moment for them to use their familiarity with thievery.
Exactly.
To identify who the thieves are.
Yeah, like have the two rogues, sneak and stealth and maybe charm their way towards somebody. Have the barbarian character threaten somebody. Have your mage cast some sort of illusions. None of those things happen. They just walk up to the guy and the guy threatens them and then they just keep following him and then they get caught. So they don't make any choices. Things just happen to them.
Do not patronize me, Azmath, for I understand all too well.
Okay, so let's talk about the most unqueenly queen ever casted to play a queen.
Birch.
It's not because she's young looking or that she's meek and weak. It's her fucking acting. I don't know, in this movie, she has the range and the vocals of a sardine.
I don't know what happened. She's a good actor. She's in good movies and she does well. You've seen her. We've all seen them.
You remember Burke? Burke from Aliens is an example of a weak leader, but he's weak in the right way in terms of performance. George McFly is a nice and meek character, but he's nice and meek in the right way.
Right.
This Empress here is just dull as dishwater.
I would have accepted Crispin Glover as the Empress. I felt very sorry for her because, as you say, it's a god-awful performance. It's like the shots of her talking are like low points for this movie, which is saying a lot. Poor Thora Birch in this movie is just stuck off in like bullshit Phantom Menace land in her own bullshit politics plot. And now she's acting against a magic mirror in this. Like, she doesn't even get to like act against people. And and her lines, seriously, it is full on Phantom Menace-y. Like, she's got lines like, "The council demands my response imminently."
What have I done?
I didn't exactly follow. I think you're right that that's the plot, but I didn't exactly follow the plot. I think that's because it literally actually makes no sense. But they open this movie with like establishing the lore, and the camera's just kind of swooping through the clouds while I think it's Jeremy Irons talking at the start, right? Or is it someone else? Anyway, while someone like gives all the backstory and the lore, and I realized, I don't know if I'm just stupid, but if you don't put the words on the screen, I actually have a lot of trouble taking the information in. I realized I was like, I need the Star Wars titles here, because while you're talking about, if you're just gonna like point a camera at fog and be like,
Yeah.
Princess Thora Birch is trying to do whatever, I don't take that information in at all.
No, yeah, it's because there's no visual to accompany. You either have
Yeah.
text or you gotta do some sort of visual that matches what you're saying, like how Fellowship begins. Because Fellowship begins with like a 2.5-minute monologue by Kate
Yeah,
Blanchett.
that's true.
By Galadriel, but it's paired with visuals that showcases what she's talking about.
Yeah, that are also some of the best fantasy visuals of all time. So that
Yeah.
that helps. But yeah.
I'm not gonna die over some power struggle between a couple greedy mages.
No, you're wrong.
No, you're wrong, mage!
If you love D&T, don't watch this movie. If you hate D&T, don't watch this movie. I'm struggling to think of, like, who would you recommend this movie to?
I guess film students for what not to do.
Fair.
This movie is it felt like I just ate some like bland rice crackers with nothing else.
Right. You're right. It's not even fast food. It's like
Like I just ate some white bread. That's what this movie is. just dry ass bread on its own.
I guess my stomach is slightly fuller. If it took 2 hours to eat that slice of white bread.
Okay, so let's do the segment
Yes.
of how to make this a better campaign.
There's a part in the song Scenario, A Tribe Called Quest, featuring Busta Rhymes, where Busta Rhymes has the line, "Rah, rah, like a dungeon dragon."
Okay.
That's not my segment. That's an unrelated fact. The answer is simple for me, smaller. Focus on the dungeons. There are a million other things to fix, but I would have liked to just see a little dungeon quest and just have it smaller, have more character moments, have more of them like trapped in one scenario, wherever it's set, whether it be a mansion or a cave or ships or whatever, and just like have them go through the type of adventure that you might go through on a D&D campaign.
Yeah. Remove some of the intermediate steps that didn't do anything but pad the story to be longer, and instead just like extend the primary sequences and set pieces by having like the characters utilize their skills and their class more, because that's the point. And the other thing is get rid of Marlon Wayne. He serves no purpose whatsoever.
Yeah, that would be an instant fix.
And way more Jeremy Irons. Okay, so next week we are gonna do a little indie movie. It's a tiny little film. Some of you may have heard of, some of you may not. It was once upon a time called Blue Harvest. It is 1999's Phantom Menace, and we may be having some opposing opinions on that movie.
But one thing's for sure, at last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi.
All right, we're done. We're done this week. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week with Phantom Menace.